right. Well, I'm very privileged to be here. It's exciting. I don't think there's any area in South Africa where more events took place during the 19th century that influenced the way we think today, the way our country has developed. And so I want to take you back on a journey to the times of the frontier wars. But I first want to start with a little bit of the missionary history, just to give you a background, because they played a tremendous role, I feel, in the shaping of this country. Maybe not so much from a white perspective, but definitely from the black perspective. All right, let's get going. These are a list of the 9 frontier wars, and we're going to focus just on the last 4. But before that, I'd just like to show you the area that I'm going to be covering. I realize it's not so easy to see right from the back, but you can see the Great Fish River mouth is here, and East London's there. So this is the Fish River. That is the Buffalo River. There's King Williamstown, and we head up to the Waterkloof in the north. As far as the wars are concerned, this is the Fish River bush. And maybe I should just mention that the Xhosa were not at all like the Zulu. The Zulu were a very well-organized group, especially in the times of Shaka. He had a full-time army in training, discipline. They were focused on preparing for any war. Not so the Xhosa. And so they used the forests and the indigenous bush as their strategy for taking on the enemy. And the enemy was obviously the settlers and the whites once wars broke out. So they used the Fish River bush to their advantage, the Piri forest. This is the Amatola Range here with Hogsback up there. And then, of course, the Waterkloof. So there were 3 main forest or bush areas. Most of the battles took part. And then I'm going to just touch on 3 of the missionaries, the very first missionaries amongst the Bantu-speaking people of South Africa. The first one started his mission down at Piri, the second one at the Cat River, and then we're going to look at the Chumi mission station. Okay, the first person we want to look at is Johannes van der Kemp. I'm not a historian, but I remember at school being taught about Van der Kemp and what a bad guy he was, and I upset all the farmers, the Boers. But he played an amazing role, even though he had all his shortcomings. He was a person with a military background from Holland. He served in the army for many years. He moved in high circles. And then he decided he's going to become a doctor, and he studied. He got his degree. And tragedy hit his family. They were, I think it was on the river, they were sailing the yacht, and it capsized in a storm. His wife was drowned, his daughter or daughters, I'm not sure if there were 2 of them. And this had a tremendous effect on him, and he made him consider his life again, and decided to go on a search. And I think he actually picked up a tract, and this got him thinking. And he came to know the Lord, and he felt a calling upon his life to come to Africa and be a missionary. He's a person who's now 50 years old, and he makes a journey to South Africa. He's got a companion, and he gets to Graafrenet on his trek into the bush, and immediately the people are very suspicious of him, because it was a time of war. He arrived in 1799, and the 3rd frontier war was on the go, and it lasted about 2.5 years. So everybody was suspicious of him. They said, who is this crazy chap coming to minister to the Xhosa, to bring a faith to them in a time like this? So there were some British deserters from the army who were living in the area, and they planned to assassinate him, but they got their timing wrong, and he managed to escape death there. On his way now to the area that he was going to minister, he had to face an attack with their wagons from the Xhosa. He survived that, and he arrived at the great place of Chief Ngika, who was the recognized chief amongst the Xhosa at the time. And living amongst the people at Ngika's great place were people like Kunrad de Beys. You've probably heard of him. He was a real big giant of a man, and he got a bit upset that this missionary was coming here to upset the apple cart, his sort of domain. And, well, obviously Van der Kemp didn't feel very welcome. But as I say, the times were so rough, the war was going on, and his assistant just couldn't take it anymore, the stress and the tension of being in this particular setting. And suddenly he said to Van der Kemp, "The Lord has called me to India." So sadly, he said goodbye to him, and he pushed off, and things went from bad to worse, because suddenly Chief Ngika, he was having second thoughts about the whites and staying in his great place, and the missionary, and he plotted to kill them. And the base got to hear about it, Van der Kemp got to hear about it, and now they were in trouble. They were really worried. So they planned an escape. They decided they're packing up and going, but they realized if they pack their wagons and they just start trekking back to Graafrenet or wherever, they're going to be wiped out by Ngika and his people. So what they did, they planned an elephant hunt, and instead of going in the direction of Graafrenet, they made their way towards the Kai River, and it took them 5 months, but eventually they went in a big circle, got back to Graafrenet, and from there Van der Kemp made his way to present-day Port Elizabeth, which wasn't there then, and he started his Bethelsdorp mission station. Of interest with Bethelsdorp, he now married a freed slave's daughter. She was only 16 years old. Her sole possessions in life were 2 sheepskins and a necklace of beads. And I think it typifies the simplicity of his life too. When he went into Xhosa land, he built a hut 7 feet square, and that was it. So he lived off the bush, and I think this is what made him very acceptable by the Xhosa people. And even today, he's looked up to as the man who appeared as if from nowhere. I'm just showing you this picture. This is, the old mission house of John Ross. And it was on this piece of land where Van der Kemp began his mission work. As I say, he only lasted 15 months, and he pushed off from there. Missionaries weren't very appreciated by the Cape Governor in those times. And Somerset didn't want any more missionaries. And it was only in 1816 that he sort of gave in and decided, okay, I can do with one missionary because I can use him as a spy, as a government agent. I can get all the information I want from what's going on across in Xhosa land. And so he allowed Reverend Williams to come. And he came also in very difficult times because Chief Ngika was sort of in a big struggle with a chief Ndlambe who had become involved in all the previous frontier wars, but he was getting an old man now. But he had a beautiful lady, and her name was Tutula, and so she was actually the most beautiful woman in Xhosa land, and Ngika didn't like the idea that he had her, so he went and hijacked her and got him to his great place. So you can imagine the tensions. This carried on for about 30 years, and so this poor missionary, he had to satisfy the British, telling them about whatever horses were being stolen or what was, if there were army deserters who were coming into his area. And he was also trying to convert the Xhosa. So it was a very difficult time, but he did get a handful of converts. And one of those converts was a person by the name of Nsakana. And he became a famous prophet. So some people say that his conversion was similar to Paul of Damascus, on the road to Damascus, that it didn't involve any preaching. But be that as it may, Reverend Williams did help disciple him, and he became a tremendous convert. He was the first convert after Church. This is the Chumi mission. This is now the third mission attempt to establish Christianity in the area. We've had Van der Kemp, he failed. We've had Reverend Williams. And now John Brownlee arrives. He arrives here in 1820. And he had to wait when he arrived. He came out to South Africa as a missionary. The only education he had was, he was a gardener. But he came out with the Reverend Moffat, who was also just a gardener. So we've had the doctor come and try his luck at converting the causes, and now we have John Brownlee. And he set up his mission station on this little rise here. You can see this is a modern-day farmhouse, but that is the original driveway up to the mission station, and there was also part of the mission down here. He had two sons who featured quite prominently in Xhosa history, and one of them was Charles Brownlee. And the Xhosa people actually gave Brownlee's wife a little bangle made from, I think, the tail of an ox, and they claim that as a result of that, his wife actually could give birth. And so they accepted Charles Brownlee almost as one of them, and he played a huge role, as we shall see a little bit later. So it was Van der Kemp. He had one notable convert, and that was Chach. But Chach, who became a very prominent guide and an interpreter for all the missionaries who were to follow. And then, as I say, the previous missionary, Williams, he had a prominent convert in Sekana. And then we have Brownlee, and he has a person by the name of Tia Sorga, who grows up on this mission station, the son of a counselor for the chief. And he became the first black missionary Presbyterian minister in Southern Africa. And he played a tremendous role in the future. This is just a memorial to Nsekana. He grew up in this little area here. This is between Peddy and Breakfast Flay. Breakfast Flay is in the distance here. This is just a person I met who lived in this neighboring village, and it's very rare to find people who know the history, even amongst the African themselves. But he's on the ball, and it was nice to hear from him a bit of the history. This is Nsekana's grave. He didn't live very long, and strange, he knew he was going to die. He actually told his disciples, his followers, to dig his grave, and he got into his grave and he died, quite literally. This is called Tambuki's Vlei. It's a beautiful little valley that's in the Cat River area. Now, Brownlee had been ministering at the Chumi mission, and other missionaries were starting to join him. There was the Reverend Ross and Bryce and Williams. And he decided, no, it's time that he also spreads his wings, and he established the Buffalo Mission, because Jan Chachu, or Johnny Chachu, came from this area. His father was a chief, and he wanted his people also to get educated and hear the word of God. So this is actual site of the original mission house of John Brownlee. But during the 1835 war, 34-35, the mission station was attacked, and they managed to escape, but the place was set on fire and totally destroyed. After the war, Sir Harry Smith arrives on the scene. He takes over this burnt ruin, and he builds this lovely house again. And when John Brownlee comes back, he says, "But this is my house you in, Sir Harry." And he looks at him and he says, "It's mine by conquest." So Brownlee had to move out. At the end of the Sixth Frontier War, the people in London thought this was an unjust war. They had this big inquiry there, and they decided to give this whole section of land back. And so Brownlee got his house, built all at government expense, no problem to him. This is just a graveyard in the Chumi mission area. You can see the peak in the background. Reverend Chalmers is buried here. There's also a mechanic by the name of Weir who's buried there, and their children. And I love these sort of places because you get the story. When you go into the graveyard, you read about how they felt about their little ones departing this life, and it's quite touching. This is Reverend James Reed's grave. He was also sort of in the same vein as Van der Kemp, also despised by most of the whites and the settlers in that time. And his graveyard is very neglected today when you consider that he was probably the main person in that era, the Archbishop Tutu, one could almost say. And then this grave in the front is his son. He also took over and became a missionary. And James Reed was very well accepted by the Khoi people amongst whom he ministered. And he was well looked up to from their side of things. This was the Philipton Church, which is where he ministered. It's also in the Cat River area. There was a beautiful hotel that operated for many years there, the Katburg Hotel. Unfortunately, it's been closed. A lack of use, I suppose, but they've still got self-catering for people who are interested in staying there. This is a Bryce Ross church. He was the son of Reverend Ross. It's quite a prominent church in the area. And then this is the mission church that Tiosorga began. He began with this mission church, but he actually went on to establish about 4 other mission stations, which I think is quite remarkable for an African out of the bush from the Chumi mission station. The Duke of Edinburgh actually came and visited his mission station in 1860 when he was touring the country, so he got quite a bit of recognition. He had sons who made their mark in life. One became a historian, the other became a veterinary surgeon, the other a mission doctor, etc. All right, we're entering now into the period of the Frontier Wars. We'll start with the Sixth Frontier War. It was known as Hince's War. There was a person by the name of Popo. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, but he was trying to recoup some cattle that had been captured and were being driven across to the farmers in the white area. And he was trying to set them free. They were his chief Charlie's cattle, and he was shot in a skirmish there. So the Xhosas went to war because you don't shoot a Xhosa chief, even though it's only a graze that he got to his head. So the Xhosa invaded Albany. They drove off the cattle. They attacked the farms. Quite a lot is written about it. If you Grahamstown area, this was the big war because it was quite a vast sweep. A notable incident at that time was obviously at Salem, where there was a Quaker by the name of Gush, and he decided to, as he saw the Xhosa army descending impis on the mission, the settlement, he went out to confront them, and he went without gun, just on his own with 1 or 2 people behind him, and he started chatting to them, and he said, "Look, what are you coming to do here? How can we help you?" And he offered them bread and tobacco and maybe a few other little things. And the Xhosas were so impressed with this that they packed up their spears and they went on elsewhere. So the settlement of Salem was saved. And then Colonel Harry Smith came to the rescue. He was in Cape Town. He got on his horse, and it took him 6 days, and he was going to come and sort out the war. We begin with the Fish River Bush. Grahamstown was the center at that time, and this was now the first experience that Sir Harry Smith and most of the British soldiers had in South Africa of bush warfare. And you can see how dense the bush is and how difficult it must have been. Colin England actually came to this area. He was sent by Harry Smith, and within no time he was heading back to Grahamstown. He just left his army alone in this bush, and he pleaded for help. He said, "I can't cope." So Harry Smith gets out there, and he puts in a big force, and quite a few of his people were shot and killed here. There's a incident here where they thought they had set an ambush for the Xhosa, and at night they obviously heard a noise or a rustle, one of the soldiers, and they just opened fire, but they opened fire on their own people, and 5 of them were killed in that ambush there. And then we have the incident where the Mfengu crossed from the Transkei. This had a tremendous impact on the outcome of the wars that were to follow. This is the Mfengu tree. Just to take you back a bit, the Mfengu were driven down by in the time of Chaka. Their armies drove people hither and whither, and the Mfengu were driven south, and they settled amongst the Galaka, which were across the river. You had the Galaka and you had the Chagabi. The Galaka were on the Transkei side of the Kai River, and the Chagabi were on the south side. It was a missionary by the name of John Aleph who hatched the idea, and he suggested to Sir Benjamin Durban, why don't we invite the Mfengus to come across and settle in what had become the neutral territory. They had created a separation between black and white, and they decided it was a good idea. So John Aleph was like a modern day or olden day Moses with the Israelites. About 16,000, 17,000 Mfengu crossed over the river with all their cattle. And on the day after they crossed the Fish River, Sir Benjamin Durban decided he's going to change the map of the area, and he rolls the boundary over from the Fish River, and he makes the boundary now the Kai River. Just one other point about this milkwood tree. It's very interesting that even to this day, the Mfengu gather at this tree. I think it's on the 16th of May. They first met here after they had crossed the Kai River and come into this area, and they pledged their allegiance to the Queen and to the country, that they would be loyal citizens. And to this day, 16th of May, you will find crowds of people here from surrounding villages come to commemorate this time. They went on to become the educated elite amongst the black, because their hearts were open to Christianity, and obviously being on the mission stations, they received education and literacy, etc., etc. This is another incident. Paramount Chief Hintsa, whenever things were going difficult in the war, they would normally send attack the Transkei area where the Galaka lived, because it was open country and it was easy on horses to attack, capture cattle, and also the Xhosa that lived and faced the attacks. They would capture cattle and drive them into the Transkei and sort of have that as like a reserve bank, and when the war was over, they'd help themselves to what cattle. But he offered to show Sir Harry Smith where the cattle were, because Sir Harry Smith said, we will bring about peace terms if you give us 50,000 head of cattle. So poor old Hintsa doesn't know what to do, but on his way to show Harry Smith, he makes a bolt for it, and Harry Smith chases after him, grabs him by the neck and pulls him off his horse because his gun failed and he couldn't shoot. And anyhow, Hintsa is wounded by a shot from one of the people who were with Sir Harry Smith, and he makes for the river, and he's shot twice, and then he's shot again, pleading for mercy. And it was quite a nasty incident in the history of the Eastern Cape. Bailey was an 1820 settler lad who became a lay preacher, and the reason he joined the army was basically to minister to people, the Khoi and whoever he was amongst. And he was sent on a party, a small group, because Sir Harry Smith was having a great difficulty in bringing the war to an end. He was sending in massive amounts of troops into areas, but the Xhosas saw them coming and they would elude them. So he decided to send in small parties. Bailey went into a party with 30, and there was another gentleman, Bedorf, I think it was, who was in charge of 30. And they were told to stick together, but they broke that rule and they split apart. And Bailey eventually came across the Xhosas, and they got skirmishing. They stayed a night in an abandoned farmhouse, and the next day they were followed all the way to this river. There's a little stream behind you, and they ran out of ammunition, and they were all killed. It was never known what had happened to them, even though it was quite close to King Williamstown. Apparently the fighting in the indigenous bush was dampened, and it was about 4 or 5 months later only that they found the bodies. It was his father who was basically the founder of East London in 1847 or so. Okay, now at the end of this war, as I said, Benjamin Durban had redrawn the boundary lines, and so Harry Smith thought, well, this is wonderful. He's going to be governor of this new province. It was called the province of Queen Adelaide. Little did he know that the missionaries were across the sea and telling them exactly what was going on. Even John Chachu, who was the interpreter for Brownlee, he went overseas, and James Reed went overseas, and Stockenstrom, and they sort of said, this war has been unjust. And so Glenelg sent a letter to Benjamin Durban and said, if you don't give me a good reason why we shouldn't return this land that you've annexed back to the Xhosa, I'm going to annul your agreement. And Harry Smith wrote a very quick letter, sent it off. But Sir Benjamin Durban took 14 months to get a letter across to London. And of course, by that time, Glenelg was very upset, and he decided to go ahead. So while Harry Smith thought he had a new kingdom for himself, the tables were turned. He faced a disciplinary court trial as a result of that shooting of Hinsa. And it's quite a sad story, but the witnesses all gave differing accounts, etc. This is the only picture I've really got of Fort Wilshire. It was the biggest fort on the boundary at the time. And what we're looking at here is actually a bread oven. I don't know if you can notice it, but there's the inside. And it was actually used as a defense at one stage, I believe, when the Xhosas attacked, because this fort was built right on the Fish River in an exposed site with hills on the other side. And some soldiers had to find refuge in this. Unfortunately, the fort is no longer there today. You can just see the stone ruins. Apparently, McCormick sold it for two cows. And I think a lot of the stonework from the fort is what you'll see in Fort Beaufort today in those old houses. They used it. And that's what they did with a lot of these forts, unfortunately. This is a double drift post. To get to Fort Wilshire, you needed to cross the Fish River, and it was at this point. This is just some rhino that are in the double drift game reserve between the Fish River, the Kashgama River. That was no man's land, remember. Today, if you go there, it is a beautiful game reserve. It was Andries Vosloo and Sam Knott and double drift that are combined. And what I like about this is the frontier wars in this area. If you go to these forts and that, the terrain, the environment, you can imagine it is just as it would have been in those days. It is just bush country. Okay, so the land is returned to the Xhosas, and there's a short span of time, and then the seventh frontier war breaks out. And this war breaks out, there's accumulation of reasons, but the final trigger is that this person by the name of Tsila, he steals an axe from a shop. The axe is worth 3.5 pennies, but he's arrested, and tensions are now rising very high, and they decide they're going to send him rather to Grahamstown to face court. And while he's on his way, the local chief, Tola, decides he's going to free this man. He's part of his clan, and yet he meets up with the prisoners being taken to Grahamstown, but Tsila is handcuffed to another colored person, and so they cut his hand off, and the guy dies. There's a bit of a skirmish, and this ex-thief's brother is actually so happens to be killed in the skirmish, but he gets away with it now, and Colonel Hare decides, okay, I want this prisoner back, and the chiefs refuse to send him back, and so war breaks out. Everybody thought this was going to be a walk in the park, and they And they rolled in. They had a big wagon train of 125 wagons. And they came to this place, which is a Burns Hill Mission Church on the Kashkama River. And Somerset decided that he wants to move up into this Amatola catchment area. He was attacked there by the Xhosas, and he decided he needs a camp to be established there and have all his resources there, because all his ammunition, all his tents, all his equipment were on these wagons that he had left behind under guard. So the poor people looking after these wagons, they obey instructions. The next day they cross the river here, and about 3.5 kilometers up here, they're attacked. And as I say, 65 wagon loads of supplies are in one go just gone. Fortunately, the last few wagons, which had the ammunition on, were saved. And it's not mentioned in history books, but a recent book mentions the fact that Andries Botha, one of the Khoi people living in the Cat River area, came to the rescue, and he helped save these wagons with the ammunition in from being captured. Otherwise, this would have been a total disaster. As it was already a disaster. Now the Xhosas had tasted how easy it was to get nice goodies. They had all the food, they had all the regiment's silverware, they had all their clothing, and they decided, let's go for more wagon trains. And the next one they attacked was on its way to Pedi, and they captured, 43 wagons. Easy going, easy pickings. And so the next thing they decide, they're going to attack the Mfengu, who have now been settled in the area and are fighting on the side of the British. And they're living in a village close to Pedi. They get attacked. The people, the Mfengu, call for help. A person by the name of Richardson, who's now in charge in this steady post, is dragging his feet. It takes about 2.5 hours to get his 7th Dragoons ready and out to help the Mfengu. By the time he gets there, he decides he's going to fire some cannon shots at Xhosa. He does so, and he hits a hornet's nest, and the Xhosa decide they're going to attack Richardson now. And the moment he sees them coming to attack him, he just quickly sounds the retreat, and he's back into the safety of the fort. Yeah. So it wasn't very much bravery shown on his account there. The Mfengu lost all their cattle, and the Xhosa decided 1 month later to attack this post itself. You can realize it must have been a very difficult job, and it had a cannon on top, which was mounted there, and so they weren't very successful. But the Mfengu weren't allowed in the fort. It was only the whites, and so all their cattle were around the fort, and with all this cannon fire going off, the Xhosas managed to drive away their cattle. So everything was going from bad to worse, and that's what John Philip had to say about it. Then there was the Battle of Gwanga. And just prior to this, after that, what Philip had said, that it was such a desperate situation that they called a day of prayer and humiliation to seek God's action to turn around things. And it looks like their prayers were answered, because the next big incident was the Battle of Gwanga. And it's a very minor stream, but it features prominently in history of the Eastern Cape. And there were two chiefs here. The one chief was Mhala. His name was the Wildcat. And the other chief was Siolo. And Siolo was brave, and he said, no, we're going to go through this country in daylight. But the other chief, the Wildcat, decided, look, I operate at night. And his was a wise choice. He got through. They were on their way to attack another wagon. They wanted another few dozen wagons that they could help themselves to. As it was, Sir Harry Smith was in the area, and he sent a person by the name of Jack Bissett across the hill and said, can you go and look for a nice spot for us to have breakfast? And as he goes over the rise, he sees Siola's men all in the open veld, and he turns around his horse and he's back to Somerset, and he says, hurrah, we've got them. And the Cape Mounted Rifles and all the people, the cavalry, They charge over the mountain, over the rise, and they climb into the Xhosas here. And it is the only battle, really, where the Xhosas were caught in the open and suffered a great defeat. And it actually led to the turning point in this whole war. Another incident was involving, this is on the Wolf River. Sandili decided that the war was dragging on long enough, and he thought, let's have some peace talks. So he tells this person, Bissett, that accompany me and I will hold talks with the governor. And he was under the impression that he was just going for talks, but he ends up in a prison in Grahamstown and finds himself in hot water. So Harry Smith, in the meantime, had been in India, and he became the hero of a place called Aliwal. He was crowned with glory. He was received by the Queen, and he was really puffed up with his success. And he decided that he's going to end this war. And he arrives in Port Elizabeth. At Port Elizabeth, he meets Makomo, Chief Makomo, and he humiliates him. He actually puts his foot on his neck, and he says, "I'm the chief in Nkulu, and you are going to obey me." And this irked him. At the same time, he went on to Grahamstown. He met Chief Sandili, who is now in jail there, and he made him kiss his feet, and then he set him free. And well, things came to bite Sir Harry Smith back there. So Harry Smith and Benjamin Durban, they annulled all the treaties. They took back the land that was given back to Xhosas, and they extended the boundary once again to the Kai River. This time they called it the British Kaffraria. As I say, the neutral territory was taken away. Okay, now we come to the Eighth Frontier War. So you can see these wars are one after another. That's why they talk of this as a 100-year war. The Xhosas went back to growing their crops and to getting their cattle right again, and then they would be back at war. And this is just laying out the setting. You can see a little copy here. That's where Fort Cox was built on. And I'm digressing a bit here, but there was a battle at Boma Pass, which we will cover now. And then after the Battle of Boma Pass, so Harry Smith is now holed up in this fort. Very embarrassing for the hero of Aliwal. He can't do anything, and he's in charge of the army. Fort Hare is in this vicinity here. He calls for help from Fort Hare, and Somerset sends his troops here. They get into such a big fight here, and they're losing so many of their men that he has to draw back, and it is quite a big battle. So let's get on to Boma Pass. McKinnon is sent in with a column, and his function is to give a demonstration of the power and the might of the army, and that to try and make Sandili surrender, and they wanted to capture Sandili. After this battle, there was a road constructed here, but in the time that the battle took place, it was just a small track that went along here, and this is the actual site of the battle. This dam wasn't there, obviously. There was a river there. It was the start of the Eighth Frontier War. A person who was quite a hero at the time, Jack Bissett again. We mentioned him. He's the one who saw the Siola's people. He's the one who took Sandili to Grahamstown. And he was marching in front with McKinnon and his men, and the Xhosas were hiding in the bush here and above the kranzes and on this side of the river. And they allowed the Africans to go through, African force, and then the Khoi soldiers, the Cape Mountain Rifles, were allowed to go through. And only when the British soldiers were passing this point, they triggered their ambush and they attacked. And the British received quite a mauling. And Bissett actually asked permission to come back if he could try and rescue the men who were on foot. He gets into the scene of battle here, and he gets shot in the thigh, and the ball comes out his left hip, and he's bleeding profusely, but he carries on, and he finds the surgeon I think it's Stuart, who'd been shot in the chest, and he's leaning over to help him, and another ball from a bullet from the causes hit the surgeon in the head, and his brains just splatter all over Bissett's head and shirt, and he decides, no, we can't defend what we're doing here, we need to get out, and he makes his way out, gets to the top, and he's bleeding to death, so they quickly put a tourniquet on his wounds, and there's another doctor there, and when he looks at the wound, he just faints, and he falls over Bissett, and it's quite a hectic scene. I think he actually saw the injury and decided, there's no hope, let me go on and sort somebody else out, but in the meantime, he fainted over. Jack Bissett, he also had collapsed. He comes around, and he's got a bit of tea in his flask, and he gives it to the doctor, and he recovers enough to carry on with the work there. They spend the night at Keiskammerhoek in the mission station that Robert Niven had established there. It was called Uniondale, and because they stayed there, that mission station came to an end because it had now compromised. They had allowed British soldiers who were attacking their chief to come and stay there. So the next morning, they decided they can't get back to Fort Cox to safety. They'll have to come around via the Tabakandrote, which is that peak you see there. And on the way there, they're carrying Bissett on the stretcher, and they come under fire, and they decide, no, this is too dangerous. They just drop him, and they run. But fortunately, there were some Khoi Cape Mounted Rifle people following, and the officer in charge decided, no, we can't leave our buddy here. And he orders the others off their horse, and they start carrying him. And as they come over the neck here, they come across the bodies of about 15 people of the 45th Regiment. They've been killed, I think, the day before. They've been horribly mutilated. It's a horrible scene. You can just see the outline of the fort here. This is a bit of the stonework here. As I say, most of these forts, they help themselves to the stonework afterwards. And they reach the safety of this fort. And for the next 26 days, the soldiers in this fort, this tiny little fort area, are under siege. And they attacked by Sandili and his men. And it's hectic. McKinnon carries on with his force to Fort Cox to help Sir Harry Smith there. But all the injured he leaves here, including Bissett, who's now suffering badly. He's not getting enough treatment. But fortunately, there's a lady from one of the farms who escaped and got to the fort as the war broke out. And she brought, I think it was a chicken, it could have been a turkey, whatever. But it laid one egg a day. And this one egg kept Bissett alive. And he was there for about a month before it was safe enough for troops to get back to King Williamstown. The next big incident was an attack on Christmas Day. Sir Harry Smith had encouraged retired soldiers to set up little villages in the beautiful Chumi Valley, which you all know is the way up to Hogsback. And there were 4 or 5 villages established. This one is Auckland. Is just a little bit off the map here. This is a Hogsback village up top. It's Christmas Day. The people are eating Christmas dinner, and some of the Xhosa arrive, and Kayempi's in charge. He's the chief. And the settlers decide, well, we'll show them some hospitality. We'll share lunch with them. And while they're sharing their lunch, suddenly Kayempi gives a loud scream, and it's war. And so they had to flee into each village had to build a little defensive tower or something that in case of war, they'd be safe. But I think they were a bit lax, and they hadn't even put a roof on this place yet. So some of them died in running to the fort, but all the women and children, the rest of the men get into this little tower, and they fight it out. They're running out of ammunition. The women and children, the Xhosa never killed them during war. They were always allowed to go free, so they let the women and children go free. And every one of the men was killed that night. The battle around this fortified building carried on until the morning, and then they, as I say, they all lost their lives. Woburn was also attacked. That was another fortified village. A number of them were killed, and a place called Johannesburg, named Johnsburg, named after Sir Harry Smith's Spanish wife. So that was Christmas Day. So things, just like the previous war, they're not getting off to a very good start. As I say, Henry Somerset then attempted to relieve Sir Harry Smith, who's holed up in Fort Cox. It was about 10 days or so. And in that battle, all these people listed on this plaque here, they lost their lives, a lot of British soldiers. This is just one of the officers here, Gordon. They say this was the most treacherous battle that the British ever fought on African soil until that time. I think the next great battle one would speak of would have been Rorke's Drift. It was hand-to-hand combat. Yeah, it was a big disaster. Then Sir Harry Smith escapes out of the fort, and the only way he can do it is by dressing himself up as a Cape-mounted rifleman, the coloured group, and 150 of them are all on horseback, and they make a charge for King Williamstown. The Khoi rebellion breaks out. The Khoi had always fought on the side of the British, but they were always mistreated. Their families weren't looked after during time of war. An amazing thing about the Khoi is that something like 94% of their men volunteered for fighting when a war broke out, as against, I think it was about 3 or 4% of whites, the farmers and the settlers. So they were tremendously loyal to the country, but they were mistreated. This is just a reenactment that we had in the area. And then Hermanus, he attacked Fort Beaufort. He's dressed in a black bonnet, but unfortunately for him, he met his match there and he was killed. They went and built this sort of fortification in Fort Beaufort. I don't know if you've ever seen this. These are towers that protected coastal areas in the Mediterranean. For some reason, the British thought the causes were to get big weapons, and they decided they needed this artillery tower. This is just some of the army barracks that you see in town there. A very interesting story, just diverting a bit here, was Anne Moffat. She was living in England, and she fell in love with a person by the name of Marvin, John. And he just disappeared one day, and she was heartbroken. But she had always remembered he had spoken about one day becoming a sailor. So she thought, well, he's obviously taken to the seas, and she was desperate to find her lover. And so she wants to join the Marine, go on board a ship, but she's a lady, and she realizes she can't. She's got no escort. So she borrows her brother's clothes. She gets dressed as a man, and she applies, and she gets on board a ship, and she's busy sailing in the oceans of the seas, trying to find her lover. She eventually, I think it's maybe 1-2 years now, traveling the seas, and she's actually climbing the riggings of the ship one day, and she slips and falls, and she's badly injured. And of course, when the doctor examines her, he realizes, hey, but we've got a lady on board ship here. And anyhow, she was taken under the care of one of the wives of the officers who were on board ship. And the name of the person was Colonel Lindsay, that family. And it just so happened that they were now going to Fort Beaufort. And so she goes with the family. She's looking like an au pair, looking after the kids there. One day she's wheeling the children around, and she sees the soldiers on duty there. And she recognizes this person, but this is my John. And she gets so excited. She runs home. She tells the Lindsays, I found my lover. And they wouldn't believe her. But anyhow, Lindsay decides, okay, he will investigate. And he pulls this person out. And he says, no, but my name is Mullins. I'm not John. And but she insists it's the right person. And so they do a bit of inquiry, and they realize it's the right person. He's just on a false name. And so they fall in love once more. They're planning a wedding, and he goes off to Grahamstown. He had said that he can't marry yet because he's not earning a big enough salary. But because Colonel Lindsay has got some authority there, he makes it so that he gets his promotion. And so the wedding day is set. He's coming back, and he has to cross the Koonip River. But the Koonip River is in flood. And he gets halfway across, and he gets into difficulty, and he's swept away, and he's drowned. And Anyhow, she's heartbroken, but eventually she pulls herself together, and she marries a person by the name of, I think it was Moffat, and Samuel Moffat, that's right. And they move across eventually to Peddy, and he's defending Peddy, that battle that we looked at there, and he's shot in the arm. He has his arm amputated. He can't be a soldier anymore in the army, so he's given a pension. I think it's £1.09 a day. Anyhow, it's quite a long story, but let me end it because we need to carry on. Fort Armstrong was then taken. As I mentioned, the Khoi had rebelled, and they took over this fort. And so Harry Somerset charges, comes in with his cannon. He kills about 27 of the Khoi inside the fort here. You can just see a bit of the ruins. And another 9 men die in that tower there. The burghers from Post Retief have also joined in the battle. And it was quite a scene. There were 12 battles of Whittlesea, the Shiloh mission, and the people in Whittlesea fought each other. I won't go into that now. And then the Waterkloof. This was the highlight of the Eighth Frontier War. And one of the prominent people killed there was Fordyce. They thought he was going to be the person who was going to bring this war to an end. He was well loved by his men. And this is just a setting of Waterkloof. This is Fuller's Hook here. If there was any amazing battle site in South Africa, we talk of Isandlwana, but to me this was the place. In these forests, the Xhosa people, there weren't many of them, and the Khoi rebels, they held the might of the British Army at bay for 15 to 18 months. The Zulu War lasted 7 months, and that included an interlude where they went back to get more supply. They battled it out in these forests. We had a little reenactment made. We had a film, I don't know if any of you saw it on SATV, called the Old Frontier Route. It's just showing some of the scenes in that area. This is a picture of Makomo. He didn't die in this battle, but he was the hero of the area. And he died in Robben Island. He was twice arrested and sent to Robben Island for a long period of time, especially the first time. And when Ciskei became independent, there was a witch doctor who said she'd be able to find his bones on Robben Island, even though it was a totally unmarked grave. And she spelt out, she said, this and this and this will happen when we go there. And as it turned out, it was exactly, it was raining, they'd find metal and this and whatnot. So when they found bones where they dug, they realized this must be Makomo. And so he was buried on Tabakandota. The sinking of the Birkenhead, I think that was perhaps best known as an incident in this war. They lost a lot of people. All the women and children were saved because of the discipline of the soldiers. So anyhow, that war dragged to an end. Many of the soldiers who were sent out died in the Fish River bush, especially from the 6th Regiment. And then we have the Nongaza incident. I think most of you know about this, the great cattle killing. The Xhosa had fought 8 wars and they just weren't getting anywhere. And they were becoming desperate. And this 16-year-old girl goes down to the river and she has a vision. She sees the people rising out to the water, the ancestors, and they tell her, go and tell the people, kill all your cattle, destroy all your crops, even your grain pits, empty them because they're all going to be filled with new grain, and the whites are going to be driven into the sea. In the meantime, Sir George Grey's now in charge, and he decides that he really needs to break the power of witchcraft amongst the Xhosa people. He builds Grey Hospital specifically for that purpose, so that people wouldn't be smelt out and that people could come here and receive their healing. As I say, the day comes that Nongaza said this would come to pass. There was a Mhlakazi who was her uncle who communicated with Hinsa and told him what to do. And they said there would be 2 sons over the mountain of Tabakandota. But they were all excited when the day came. And when the day passed and nothing happened, they were desperate because they were literally skeletons. When they were building new flats in this area in King Williamstown, they just came across hundreds of human skeletons, and they realized that these must have been a mass grave from the time of that cattle killing. And I'm not sure what the actual figures are, but it was between 40,000 and 100,000 Xhosa people died of starvation. It was terrible. And over 400,000 cattle. It is said that Nangauza said that the cattle are polluted because there was lung sickness there. If you want to read more up on this big story, Jeff Perez has written a book, The Dead Shall Rise. Then we get to the Ninth Frontier War. We nearly finished. It all started over not enough beer at a wedding party. And some of them Mfengu had gone and resettled because Sandile refused to move across the Cairo River. He just loved where he was. And so they allowed them Mfengu to settle there, and they held the party, and some Galeka arrived because when there's a party, when there's a wedding, everybody's of course invited. Not enough beer, a fight breaks out. The Mfengu, because they are recognized by the British, so they are obliged to go and help. This is where the war broke out, the Ninth Frontier War. There was just a village just slightly to the left, and that's where the beer party broke out. We're talking in the vicinity of Butterworth. There were 3 big battles, Guadana, Abeka, Battle of Kentani. I won't go into them. This is a monument that was set up by the government recently in commemoration of the Battle of Kentani. But the war then spread. Everybody thought the war was over, but Sandile decided he's got to carry on fighting. And he was actually in this Battle of Kentani, but they managed to get out of it. This is the Piri Forest. You've all heard of the Zulu Wars, and most of the people who fought in the Zulu Wars actually fought in the Ninth Frontier War. So you get people like Evelyn Wood. He led the North Column in the Zulu War. He actually established a little fort here, which was called Fort Evelyn. These are just some scenes in the indigenous forests. And this is the setting. Sandile's cave is up there. Lord Chelmsford in those days was called Tessinger. It was only when his father died that his name changed. But he was in charge in this war here, the second part of the war. And he needed to clear this forest of all the Xhosa because they had made it their fortress. And so he was too afraid to charge them full on with the limited forces he had. He waited for a whole lot of Mfengu to march all the way from the Transkei and to come and help in this battle. So he lined them up all the way along the edge of the forest. I think it was to be about 3.5, 4 kilometers. And then they walked one arm's length apart through the forest to try and flush out Sandile. They got to the bottom, no Sandile. Sandile was in this cave here. And it was only a little while later that they discovered this cave and they attacked him. But they lost so many of their men because it was a very concealed cave and a very small entrance. So they decided they're going to flush him out or starve him out. And they built big bonfires around the cave entrance. But the next morning, everything was quiet there. And they came close and then they saw that there's nobody in this cave. And then they went inside and they found it at the back entrance. And Sandile had got away. You can go on a walk to his cave today. There's a little forestry path through the Piri Forest there. That shows the site of where his cave was, the foot of those kranzes there. And then he dies. He's eventually cornered in a forest and he loses his life. And that brings the war to an end. Just a few years back, they opened his grave because there were rumors that they took his skull as a souvenir. But it was nice to know. I went out there and I saw his full skeleton lying. Everything was in order there. They'd actually buried 2 soldiers on either side of the grave to keep him quiet, they say. This is just a picture. That's Keith Smith, by the way. He's Australian. Well, he lives in Australia, British descent. And he's written books on the 8th Frontier War, the 9th Frontier War. He's really fascinated about the events here. And that brings my talk to an end. The whole of the wars were about 3 things: land, cattle, and the powers of the chiefs. And I ask you today, has anything changed? Nothing. You stole the land. We want the land. We want the resources. We want redistribution of wealth. And today they're discussing the powers of the chiefs. They want to let them hold their own courts. Let me just turn to the last slide. We're living the day where Rhodes must fall. This is the middle of King Williamstown. We've got Queen Victoria there. I think over the next 5 years, we're going to see big things happening. What I've spoken about tonight, it's going to be discussed in Parliament. It's going to be discussed in homes. What are we going to do with our heritage? Are we going to wipe it away? Are we going to divide the nation? Or are we going to live together and build a better nation together? Let's trust that sanity prevails. I thank you.